Welcome back to Food Forward. I'm your host, Alan Weiner. First, I'd like to thank Frank Jackish, CEO of Ayana Bio, for his interesting insights into the future of how CPG companies can create healthier food. Now, if you're like me and you went to college in the dark ages and the cafeteria served mystery meat and powdered eggs, you have to wonder, what if they were able to adhere to more flexible dietary needs, like being vegan, for example? Well, our next guest has the answer and solution to that. I'd like to welcome to the show Katie Cantrell, co-founder and CEO of Greener by Default. Welcome.
Thank you. Thanks so much for having me, Alan.
Absolutely. So let's start off with an overview of Greener by Default's mission, and particularly how it uses behavioral science to promote sustainable plant-based choices.
Yes. So that is our mission as an organization. We are a nonprofit and we consult with institutions, mostly hospitals, corporations, universities, and events, in order to apply behavioral science to food policy to help nudge diners towards more sustainable, healthy, plant-based foods. So our ultimate goal is to shift the norm in institutional food service. Right now, just about everywhere meat is the default, and people have to specially opt in to plant-based options, which usually only strict vegetarians and vegans bother to do. We're trying to make plant-based the default and give people the choice to opt into meat and dairy. So this preserves freedom of choice for everyone, but it encourages more people to consider choosing those sustainable plant-based options.
If I had $1 for every event that I've been to in the last 10 years that I've been a vegan, where I have to ask the server at an event or a party, hey, do you have a vegan option? And they'll like go back to the kitchen and maybe take something off the plate and give me, the garnishes, for example. And I think this is just absolutely fantastic. So tell us a little bit more about the behavioral science part of this.
Yes, so our work is based on behavioral economics. We are especially inspired by the book Nudge, which is kind of a seminal work by Cass Sunstein, a Harvard professor, and Richard Thaler, who's a Nobel laureate. And they look at the profound impact of defaults on human behavior. So defaults are the option we end up with if we don't make an active choice. So for instance, I still have the default ringtone that my cell phone came with because I simply never bothered to go in and change it. And people have a very strong tendency to stick with the default or the status quo option, partly because it's easier, it's just one less decision to make, and partly because we have this subconscious assumption that if most people around us are doing something, it must be the right thing to do. And as social creatures, we like to fit in, and sticking with the default is the surest way to do that. That's what most other people will be doing.
Interesting. So while you're doing this, how do you respect individual freedom of choice? I mean, vegans and vegetarians only make up a relatively smaller part of the population.
Yes.
How do you respect that choice?
Yeah, it's a great question. And, the work we're doing really involves a paradigm shift outside of this notion that vegetarian food is just for vegetarians. So I can give you an example so you'll see both how it works and how it's inclusive. At events, usually the default is meat, and there's maybe a box to check to request a special vegan meal. Just like you were saying, it's often really an afterthought if it's included at all. So we've actually done studies. My co-founder, Alana Braverman, led studies at Harvard, UCLA, some other universities looking at events. So in the default condition, just like it usually is, when people RSVP to the event, they got a meat meal unless they requested a plant-based meal. And what they found was about 20% of people requested a plant-based meal, 80% elected to stick with that meat default. This was on college campuses, so 20% is higher than we would see in the general public in terms of people who go out of their way to request a plant-based meal. Then for the study, they flipped it. They made plant-based the default, and they gave people the choice to request a meat meal. And so what they found was that about a third of people did request a meat meal, but about 70% of people almost 70% stuck with that plant-based default. So that's a 50 percentage point increase in the number of people eating plant-based foods simply by making it the default. And it's a perfect example of our target audience because, we are not working for vegetarians and vegans. We are really focused on flexitarians. And so what this study showed is, about 20% of people, they were the vegans and vegetarians. About 30% or so was, hardcore meat lovers who want meat every meal, every day. But 50% of people are these flexitarians who aren't going to go out of their way to request a plant-based meal, but they're perfectly happy to stick with it when it's the norm. And so that's really what our work is focused on.
Okay, so you consult and you advise. So I don't know how far into the process your work goes, but to me, it sounds like a lot of the success is on the receiving end, the institution, the college, the hospital, um, whoever is making these choices. And I would imagine that a really key element to success is messaging. So, telling a college student who might not even know what a plant-based meal is, how do you get that messaging across? How do you put it on a menu? What role do you play in that? Or what role does your client play in that?
Yeah, so, it's an interesting and kind of tricky subject. It's a very fine line. And because often people have negative associations with plant-based, vegetarian, vegan, meatless, either they think it doesn't taste good, or they think it's less indulgent, or they think, oh, that's just for vegans. If I'm not a vegan, that vegan option isn't for me. And so what we advise, which is really backed up by a large body of research, is really just focusing on the flavors, letting the ingredients in the dish speak for themselves. So one of the behavioral science strategies, the very low-hanging fruit that's easy to do, is like, instead of calling it vegan enchiladas, call it slow roasted sweet potato and black bean enchiladas. Just leading with the flavors and the ingredients, that then makes it seem more familiar to diners. It's less scary, and it seems like something that they might choose. So, education is absolutely important, but we found that, at the point of sale or right when people are about to choose food, they're thinking about what makes their mouth water. What do they love? What are they craving? What's going to satiate them? That's not really the time to talk about sustainability or carbon footprint. That actually doesn't have much of an impact. Like carbon labeling or labeling things healthy also deters people from choosing them. So when working on menus and food descriptions, we really lead with flavor.
Now, I noticed in watching some of the videos from your company, your client often is like in a hospital setting, the person in charge of nutrition for patients. Um, Tell me a little bit about how that works, since a lot of patients are on very specific diets. Who helps them make these decisions? Is the person in charge of dietary your best friend here, or does it go directly to the patient, him or herself?
It depends on the healthcare system. So we worked with New York City Health and Hospitals, Sodexo, and Mayor Eric Adams' office to implement plant-based defaults in all 11 public New York City hospitals. We piloted it first for lunches, and what they elected to do was just to pilot it for patients who were on general diets. So, not renal patients or diabetic patients or, patients on liquid diets. But about 50% of their patient population is just on the general diet. And so to keep things simple, it was focused on that. They are now working on developing plant-based recipes that meet more of those special dietary needs, but such a huge shift can take place just when focusing on patients who are on that general diet. And in New York City Health and Hospitals, both their lead dietitian and their culinary director were absolutely key to the success of the program and so enthusiastic and really took it on. And they've been really wonderful stewards of the concept too. Now they're speaking at conferences and things about it. So, most of the time when we encounter dietitians, they are familiar with the benefits of plant-based foods and may have some logistical questions, but they are generally speaking allies.
Okay, so you very politely walked into my next question. So there are, people involved in the process one of whom is, the people in the commissary who are actually creating these products. So I would imagine that a lot of them are not super experienced at making, healthy plant-based products or vegan products. And you don't bring in third parties to cook for them, but perhaps do you bring in like local farms or special purveyors of special products like maybe a vegan cheese or vegan burgers? How do you manage that process with the kitchen, suppliers, and so on?
Yeah, so we do sometimes bring in third parties to help with culinary development. It's usually Forward Food, which is a program of the Humane Society of the United States. They have a really fantastic recipe database that's divided by K-12 university and healthcare. So if we're working with institutions that need to add new plant-based items to the menu and they don't have the capacity to develop that in-house, then we direct them to that resource. And they do have training videos that are available as well. So that's immensely helpful. In terms of supply chains, that does get a little complicated, but we really work with the institutions to look at the types of foods they're already serving and they're already familiar with, and seeing if we can just augment those to make them more plant-based, and also looking at the dishes that are, most popular with diners. So for instance, we worked with LinkedIn San Francisco office, and that's a pretty health conscious audience and very diverse. And so international foods perform very well there. Latin flavors, Indian flavors were very popular. And so their culinary director loves to just play around with new recipes and read new cookbooks. And so she did a phenomenal job of just drawing inspiration from international cuisines that were already plant forward. You're not going to think twice if you see a lemongrass tofu banh mi, or, again, the like black bean tostadas. So that can help with culinary professionals too, emphasizing that these aren't entirely new products or new techniques, but really just bringing those same culinary techniques to bear in terms of really maximizing flavor and looking at, caramelizing or putting in some fermented foods, just getting creative and making sure that they're layering those flavors and drawing upon appealing ingredients that they know that their diners already like.
Interesting. So I guess as we're talking here, it makes me wonder about, some of the underserved markets that you would be able to make a dramatic impact in. So I can think of two right off the top of my head. One are airlines. I mean, the last time I got a good vegan meal on an airline was, well, never. And then caterers. I was just at an event this past weekend, and the catering meal for vegan was a big plate of spaghetti. And to be honest with you, I'm diabetic. I can't eat a big plate of spaghetti. And if they knew that there were other options or had recipes or guidance, it would make a difference. So is that beyond your reach, beyond your vision, or do you see an opportunity there?
Absolutely. And that's something that comes up a lot is airlines, because it's perfect for it. You have a captive audience, and the way that if there are vegan options offered at all, usually it's you have to specially request it, or sometimes they'll say, oh, we have chicken or vegan pasta. And so just small changes in the way that they're offering food, I think, could be immensely impactful. And of course, they can't cut the carbon footprint of flying, but they can cut the carbon footprint of the food that's served while flying. And so especially with the growth in people trying to offset their carbon footprint from flights, it would work perfectly. So actually, if anyone listening has any contacts at the airline industry, we would love that. Really, the way that we work is through warm introductions and through internal advocates. We found that we really don't get very far cold calling, but if there's, someone respected or someone who is a stakeholder, who's an employee or, tied to the institution, who can say, hey, I think this is a great initiative that's really in line with your sustainability goals. Can you take a call? That's when we really get somewhere. So we just have yet to make that type of contact within the airline industry.
What a great way to end the interview. If somebody has that warm introduction, how can they reach you?
Perfect. Yes. And yeah, not just airlines, but hospitals, corporations, universities' large catered events as well. We would love to talk with you. So you can email me at Katie, Katie, at greenerbydefault.org. And you can also visit our website, greenerbydefault.org. It has an email sign up, but also a lot of resources and all of the behavioral science studies that our recommendations are based upon.
Fantastic. Katie Cantrell, I want to thank you for joining us today on Food Forward, Nourishing the World. We will be back after this message.